And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com. Joining me, as always, is contributor Shayne Kubas. We've got a lot to talk about today because I want to reflect on the draft. Over the next series of weeks here, we're going to be breaking down each of the selections the Steelers made. We're going to do a deeper dive into each player. Today's player is going to be first-round pick Troy Fautanu. We're going to talk about him and give his scouting report and some player comparisons for him, who he might be like in the NFL. In the second half of the show, we are going to do our way too early Steelers 53-man roster prediction. We know that everybody likes that kind of stuff this time of year. Obviously, a lot's going to change between now and then, but Steelers mostly have their roster, their 90-man summer roster finalized. And so we're going to take a stab at predicting who could wind up on that roster this year. Before we do that, let's dive into some things that have been trending over the past week since we had our show last Wednesday. Shayne, Jaylen Warren went on the Not Just Football podcast with Cameron Hayward, where he kind of teased the idea of Justin Fields, Steelers quarterback Justin Fields, returning kicks in 2024. Is that something that you see as a possibility at all? Will the Steelers, really deploy him in this manner?
Let me put it this way. I certainly hope not. You can't take your. I know he's a great athlete, right? I understand that.
Mm-hmm.
I realize his best attribute right now, at least that he's shown as a player, is his ability to run. I don't think you can ask your quarterback, even if it's the backup quarterback, right? Because that's the plan, at least to start, is that he should be the backup quarterback until he can, hopefully, in my opinion, at least beat out Russell Wilson to give himself a chance to earn the right to start next year. But if he's going to be the backup quarterback, it's a pretty important position to be the backup quarterback. Not as important as being the starting quarterback, obviously, but the guys are getting paid a lot of money to be backup quarterbacks for a reason. Because if your backup quarterback isn't good and your starter goes down, your season ends. We know that we got lucky that Rudolph was able to do what he did after Trubisky fell on his face, right? It's just not very common for the backup to be good enough to come in and help you out. So especially if you have to go to your third string, which, is that going to be Kyle Allen, right? Is that who's, right now? And
Right
maybe,
now, yeah.
Maybe the undrafted UCF guy, Plumlee, whatever, right? I just would rather have my backup quarterback available to me. And if he's going to be the kick returner, I know the kick return rules are going to be much safer, but it's still running full speed at a wall of people. And I'd much rather have him just kind of hang out and be the backup if he needs to come in. Or, if you use him on offense, you could run him in that way. But let's leave the kick returning to kick returners.
Yeah, Shayne, I'm intrigued by it. I'm not going to lie.
I'd love to see it, but I'd also hate to see it.
The guy is just shy of 6'3", 227 pounds, runs a 4.46. He is an elite athlete. He's an elite playmaker with the ball in his hand. So I'm not opposed to the idea of finding creative ways to get into the football. Yeah. But I agree with you. I don't think this is the route to take.
Yeah, kick returning.
The risk reward balance still for the chance of housing one, which again, I think that Fields is capable of doing because he's so good with the ball in his hands.
Yeah.
But it's not worth the potential risk of an injury. These guys out here on special teams, a lot of these guys are bottom of the roster players trying to make something happen. And so you just don't know what, even with you should be able to avoid the big car crash collision types because you're not starting so far apart. You're 5 yards apart from each other with those new XFL style kickoff return rules. But still, it's not something I would chance for Justin Fields, who you are hoping has a chance to be this team's future quarterback, not just in the second half of the 2024 season, but beyond. And so Fields is 25 years old. He's got amazing athletic traits. And so I understand wanting to get him involved. I don't think this is what the Steelers should be exploring, though. There are other guys who can do that, other guys who can absorb the injury risk and not at a big cost potentially to the team. So, and like you said, if Russell Wilson does not perform well, and I really don't think he has been a great quarterback these last 3 years now, 2 in Denver and his final season in Seattle, you need to be able to turn to Fields sooner rather than later. And that's kind of what I ultimately hope happens. I hope that Fields wins the job outright. And you certainly aren't going to have a guy who's in contention to be your starting quarterback out there returning kicks. So I think that would be a little bit absurd if the Steelers were to go that route with him. And look, you signed Cordarrelle Patterson, right? I mean, the guy's going to be a Hall of Fame kick returner. So I know he's up there in years now, but get somebody else back there as the second guy with him. It's just not worth the risk.
I agree.
Yeah. If you guys have any other thoughts on that, you chiming in, you're joining us live here. Feel free to drop in your thoughts in the live chat. We'd love to hear what you have to say about that as well. All right, Shayne, other stuff in the news this week. The Steelers were first out of 32 teams in NFL.com's NFL draft rankings. So they pegged the Steelers as the best draft out of every team this year, topping off teams like the Chicago Bears and the Philadelphia Eagles, who also earned high grades collectively. Last week, I think we talked about their consensus ranking. So we looked at like 20 major media outlets, and the Steelers had the highest collective GPA out of all of those teams. So this goes right along with that, just kind of an extension of this a little bit later after there's been more time to reflect on the draft. But what do you think of the Steelers ranking first on this list?
I think it makes a ton of sense because I think the Steelers did the best job of anyone of marrying fit and need with also like the best players on the board. Right. And granted, that's really hard to do on purpose. It really matters how the board falls for you and what you're willing to do, because obviously being willing to take Peyton Wilson at 98 when everyone else, passed on him up to that point, that bumps your grade up because people know that Wilson is a better player than that. You're just the team that was willing to take on that risk. And I think you get a lot of credit for doing that in the sport where injury risk is a real thing. Now, obviously it has to work out still. He has to be healthy enough to play. But if he is, getting a player that is probably going to be a starting linebacker for you sooner rather than later at pick 98 is really good value, right? And you invest in the offensive line, which I know a lot of fans don't always love, depending on their level of understanding of the game. But it's so important for a team that just hasn't had a great offensive line in a long time now, right? Like we lost all the pieces that made our line so great in like the mid 2000s or mid 2010s. We need to get back to that if we want to have long-term success, because whoever the quarterback is, right, they need to be able to be kept upright, especially with the two we have right now where they're still going to take bad sacks. I hate to break it to everybody. Like the offensive line could play great this year. They're still probably going to take a bunch of sacks, but they at least are going to have time to make decisions and they're going to be given every opportunity to make plays. So I think it makes a ton of sense. They got great value. We talked about it. They took most of the players that I would have wanted them to take. So I totally agree there.
Yeah, thanks for that, Shayne. And just dropping in here, thanks, Ivan, in the chat here for informing us the Steelers have just signed Scotty Miller, wide receiver. Another one of these Arthur Smith guys here, played with the Falcons last year. Just looking him up real quick. Scotty Miller played 138 snaps from the slot last year, 124 out wide, and 90 in kick return coverage. I think that was. So it's interesting pick here because again he kind of fits that mold of another slot-ish type receiver. I mean, he's not a big guy, so
I will say he's more of a deep threat to me personally. In terms of fit, I think that's what he would probably be, is the downfield stretcher, which I think especially like if you have him as the outside receiver on a play where you are trying to run something deep down the field and have him clear stuff out. He's shown the ability to make plays down the field, especially in his time with Tampa. So I would say like it's a depth signing, but I think that has more potential than, honestly, I'd say that at this point, probably more than like Watkins that we signed, because he just hasn't really done much in the last 2 years or so. So, but in general, that's a good signing, I'd say in general.
Does it seem redundant to you at all, Shayne? Now the Steelers have Roman Wilson, they've got Calvin Austin, they've got Quez Watkins, and you've got Scotty Miller. And so I know that Miller can do some of the field stretching stuff, but at 5'9", 174 pounds, you're not going to be able to win consistently as an outside receiver at that size. And you pointed to what he did with the Bucs. Like he made a lot of big plays when he was in Tampa. It's interesting. And that leads us right into the next player we're going to talk about here is Tyler Boyd, recently signed with the Titans. I know a lot of Steelers fans were upset about that. So before we knew about Scotty Miller here, Steelers fans were kind of irate for at least a group of them out there that Omar Khan did not look into signing Tyler Boyd for $4.5 million for the upcoming season. I think that you have a ton of these guys who kind of all fit this same niche role now. What you really need is an outside receiver that you can pair with George Pickens, a guy who is a true threat on the outside. Because even Van Jefferson isn't that completely. Like he's a guy that mixed almost half and half between outside snaps and snaps from the slot last year. And so you've got a bunch of the guys that can man the slot position. I think you've got legitimately one real threat on the outside and with Pickens. Is there anybody else in this roster that can do that?
I mean, right now, like I said, Jefferson, like 2 years ago, I would have said, yeah, he can be a number two for an offense that's not going to throw the ball a ton, especially. His last 2 years, though, have kind of made me think that he might just kind of be done as far as a starting caliber player. But I will say Tyler Boyd, like if they brought him in, like he's not going to be an outside receiver for you. Like if you brought him in, like he's a better slot receiver than everyone except maybe Wilson, depending on how good he is as a rookie, because Boyd has, kind of trend down, let's say the last 2 years or so. But at the same time, like I understand why they wanted him or why fans wanted him. Obviously, he's a Pitt guy. That's a huge thing. Granted, maybe that'll slow down a little bit with our most recent experience with a Pitt guy, but whatever. But in general, I understand like the need there. But again, I don't think he would fit that role. Like he could be a number two option, but not a number two outside receiver. So it's tough. Like I understand why people would be upset, like I said, but this really wouldn't. This would just add to the same problem you just talked about. Like we have like 4 guys who probably are best in the slot and one who's a legit outside receiver outside of Pickens. It's just that they don't have any juice outside of Pickens on the outside right now.
Yeah, not at all. And I feel like, I mean, Miller's obviously not guaranteed to make the team. This is probably going to be a veteran minimum contract
plus whatever.
So, but I think it's very fair to say that I'd be shocked if both he and Quez Watkins made the team. Like, I just don't think there's any chance.
Yeah, I don't see the
guys are making the roster together.
Yeah, I don't see the point in that. Yeah.
So they are loading up. They're getting serious about finding another weapon here.
They have bodies in the room now.
You got lots of bodies. It's just, do you have the right type of guys that you need now? So that's the question that it comes down to. I think a lot of fans are going to be scratching their heads at this move a little bit. I can't get upset about anything too much. You bring a player to camp, it is what it is. So, but I agree. I mean, in a perfect world, you'd like to see them be able to get another outside receiver. I just don't want to do it. I know I'm going against the grain here, Shayne. I don't want to do it at the expense of giving up next year's draft capital. Like I'm kind of opposed to that, especially with how well Steelers have been drafting. Yeah,
I will say this comment was interesting too. Also, why does no one understand that Freiermuth is basically a wide receiver now, and Washington and Pruitt would be the tight ends? I think the problem is after last year, a lot of people just are not sure what to do with Freiermuth right now, because we know how talented he is as a receiver. But at the same time, where is he going to be best at? If we're talking about his receiver, probably from the slot. Guess what we have 12 of, it feels like now. Slot type receivers. Obviously Freiermuth is probably like the best of them technically for being like, especially because Wilson is, rookie. We don't know what he's going to be. But I just don't know with Arthur Smith, like what is his role actually going to be? Is he going to be like the Jonnu Smith type? Or is he going to like, that's probably what you want. But at the same time, like Jonnu Smith only had so much production, right? With him. Like I don't know if the role is going to be as big as people hope it is or expecting it to be. And that's one of the biggest question marks I have going into the season. And hopefully we'll get kind of more answers on that as we get closer to it.
Yeah, and that's the thing is Freiermuth can absolutely be used as a receiving threat, but it's from the slot again. And so the same thing that all these guys do. You're not going to stretch him out wide and expect him to win.
No, he's not a Kyle Pitts he doesn't.
Receiver. I mean, not what he does. He's probably got 4.75, 4.8-ish speed, and he can win with body control, and he's physical after the catch. He can do a lot of really good things. I'm not knocking him. He's just not a wide receiver. Like,
he's not a wide. No.
I'm interested to see what they do here, Shayne, because are the Steelers going to move George Pickens from Z to X and just have funnel the targets through him? And if so, who's going to be the receiver? Will that be Roman Wilson? Maybe Wilson can do Z and slot. I mean, just looking at the roster outlook right now, that might be their best option here. So, but it is interesting, and we appreciate the questions here because they're all warranted for sure. Anything else, any news related that you want to get to before we dive into our first topic today?
No, I think we can get into the big first round pick here.
All right, let's talk about Troy Fautanu, former Washington offensive tackle, the 20th overall pick in the draft by the Pittsburgh Steelers. We are going to give our scouting report here, and we'll start with the things that he does well. We'll run right through strengths, weaknesses, projected role on the Steelers, and we'll give a few NFL player comparisons. Who could this guy be in the NFL if things go poorly, if things go really well, or if what is the most likely projected scenario. And I have comps for all three of those, and I'm interested to hear what you think about them, Shayne. But let's start with the strengths here. What does Fautanu do well? I think that this guy has elite foot quickness for the offensive tackle position. And so let me run down through here because I just posted my scouting report. I'm going to fire these off, Shayne. Tell me if you disagree with any of these. We can talk about it. Strengths for Troy Fautanu. I have outstanding and effortless movement skills for an offensive tackle, elite lateral movement skills for a wide zone scheme, rapid foot quickness and pass protection, can turn and seal defenders with ease on reach blocks, excellent leverage and knee bend to mirror even the fastest edge rushers, active hands to keep defenders away from his body, a nasty demeanor when he finishes blocks in space, and an aggressive play set to keep distance between the offensive tackle and the quarterback. I know a lot of these times you'll actually notice this on film that he'll lunge out after. He's not content to just sit in his pass set and wait.
He's not a passive pass blocker, right? Like there's a lot of guys who let guys kind of come to them and then they try to dictate the rep from there. He tries to go after the edge rusher and start the rep with that mindset. Like, I'm going to dictate this rep before you have a chance to tell me what you want to do, right? Like, and I think for someone with his speed and quickness, it makes sense, because if he misses his punch, if he does make a mistake, he is able to kind of reset himself and get to the spot and cut guys off still, even if they kind of beat him when he's a little bit too aggressive, right? And I think that because of that allows him to play that way, where a lot of other guys, like, you just can't miss as an offensive tackle a lot of the time with your first punch and with him being aggressive without losing the rep. He was able to consistently still be able to hang with guys, even if they beat him because of his over-aggressiveness. Now, obviously, you don't want to see that happen as much at the next level because those guys will punish you more often. But just the fact he's able to do it at all is still a plus. And I think you talked about the foot quickness and his ability to mirror in pass protection, especially. That's the biggest reason why, despite some people kind of, and this started before we got his arm length measurements and stuff like that, but a lot of people were saying, oh, he's under 6'4", he's not the heaviest guy in the world. Well, maybe he's guard. I don't think you can justify someone with this ability in pass protection, especially just the ability to move laterally, and waste him as a guard. Like, I can't really get behind that, because when you have somebody with this ability as a mover, it's so much more valuable as a tackle, because yes, as a guard, he'd be a great run blocker, especially as a zone blocker. We can do that from the tackle spot too. But you just don't see many guys that can move like this even at the NFL level. And it's hard for me to see him moving inside for any other reason than because they have an injury or something like that, where they have to move somebody down and he can do it, right? And the other guys can't. So I agree with all the strengths. And I think that he is, at the end of the day, despite the height, which again isn't as important as the length, which he has plenty of length, he should be a tackle. And I think it's where he's going to play for a long time.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Shayne, because you watch Fautanu. I think he wins more on just pure athleticism than being a refined technician right now. There's actually quite a bit of work to do in that department.
I think so too, in some ways.
As a rep I just watched, and I put more tape on even today, and I've gone through several hours of this so far for Fautanu. There's one time where his defender spins and he gets off balance. He spins the other direction and still able to catch up to him.
Yes.
Like, some of these things kind of remind me of watching Broderick's film, where it's like, you are sloppy as all get out at times. And I do think that Fautanu is much more refined in keeping his balance than Broderick. But he has that natural athleticism where he can just recover so quickly. So A+ in terms of the athletic traits at the offensive tackle position. Let's get to some of his weaknesses here and some of the things that concern me. And obviously he can improve on some of these things. The issue with Shayne is, because of his stature, there might be a few things that he can't get much better at. And we'll talk about those as well. So my list of weaknesses for Troy Fautanu: he doesn't have the bullish strength to drive defenders off the ball as a run blocker. He's very willing and he can get out in space very well, but he can't do that as well as some of the bigger tackles that are going to be able to do that in the league. He gives ground against power rushers. He's a few hop steps back before he stalls them out. Freakish athleticism, but not a great technician, which we just talked about. That's something that you can improve on. Lunges too often in pass protection. Aggressive sets can work against him at times when he lunges and misses. He can give up a pressure that way. He struggles to stay latched as a run blocker. I've noticed too often he has his defender will shed him off in run block situations. He has adequate length, but still a short stature that could work against him at times. And he doesn't have the frame to put on much more functional mass. This guy came in at 320 pounds at his Washington Pro Day, but you're looking at him and a guy that's 6'3 3/4" and 320 pounds. The guy's fairly maxed out already. Like, I don't think you can put on a lot more functional weight. On the other hand, Shane, you look at a guy like Broderick Jones, who the Steelers drafted last year in the first round, 6'5 3/8 and 311 pounds. Broderick can put on 15 pounds of mass. You probably wouldn't even notice his frame because he looks like a tight end out there. And so very different body type from Steelers' former first round offensive tackle, Broderick Jones, a different player overall. But I do worry that he could be a little bit capped that way because there's only so much functional mass you can put on with kind of a shorter, squattier stature. And I don't know what do you think, Shane, is the ceiling is going to be in terms of like his anchoring strength and pass protection? This is something that I had no question with a guy like Amarius Mims. I do have some questions with for a guy like Troy Fautanu just because of your overall lack of size.
I think that that's where the size conversation can be had where it's fair, right? Like, I think the ability to play tackle because of the size is a whole different thing. I think some of his weaknesses that might not be able to get much better do stem from that size and that frame, where his anchoring strength is just not, it's good, but it's not great, right? And I don't know if it's ever going to be more than just good, because at the end of the day, like, he does have some, like, he's lacking some weight in his lower half. You could tell. And you could redistribute that. Like, you could work on that in the sense that, like, maybe you have to drop a little bit of weight to be able to put weight on in your lower half, but maybe you can do that over time. Maybe his anchoring strength can get a little bit better. But I think one of the reasons why he's so nimble and quick is because his lower half is a little bit lighter. He is much more looser in that part of his body. And so how much are you willing to sacrifice that to get a little bit more anchoring strength versus, like, let's just not worry about it as much and try to offset it and get his technique to a point where he doesn't get pushed back from power rushers that often, right? Where he can get his hands on guys. But then that's where the over aggressiveness, like you talked about, comes in, where as much as it is a strength at times, when it isn't a strength, it's his biggest weakness, probably, right? It's kind of one of those catch-22s where it's like, okay, well, he's so aggressive when it works, he drives guys in the ground, the rep is over like in the first half second of the play, and now your quarterback is kind of free to do whatever he wants to do. When he doesn't, though, if he can't reestablish his positioning, which again, for him, he's able to do that more than a lot of other aggressive tackles who just simply can't, recover from that as well. It's at the NFL level. Like, if he does that, it's Myles Garrett and he loses initially, the rep's over. Like, he's not going to reset on him, right? It's just, there's certain guys that he's going to face at the next level that are going to punish him for being over aggressive if he isn't smart about it. So those, I think, are his two biggest things, is definitely the anchor and then the over aggressiveness. Outside of that, the frame, again, if he can't add weight, I'm not as much worried as, again, can he redistribute that weight a little bit to make things a little easier on him? We'll see what the Steelers want to do. Maybe they just aren't worried about that. And then you said the, like, latching on to run blocking. When he gets his hands on you, like, he has some of the strongest hands in the class, in my opinion, but he doesn't seem to always be able to get a good positioning with his hands and run blocking, and that's when he can be shed. Because if his hands aren't latched on, he doesn't have the play strength, naturally, to be able to put guys into the ground as a run blocker. So,
yeah. And I know a lot of people will make the case, well, he's got leverage working for him. Like, he's short and low to the ground and still has got a good mass. And I'm like, in a lot of ways, that's true. But at the same time, it's like, I feel like when you are sub 6'4", you can only gain so much more functional strength without losing some of those traits that you have. You just have more ability to do so if you already have a bigger, longer overall frame. And so that's where I do it. The two things that I worry most about his game, Shane, is his ability to hold up when converting, when rushers are converting speed to power, getting right into his chest, and he kind of gives a little bit too much ground that way, and then getting out in space and just being able to stay engaged in those blocks.
Yeah, and that's a funny comment. Again, you're forgetting he's Samoan. He's not to be confused with Amir Mortal. Samoans never loses athleticism with size. Honestly, I can't really blame you for feeling that way. Like, those guys are just built differently. We kind of know that. But no, honestly, with his frame, I do think, like, in terms of, like, what is a good weight for him, is probably maxed out at about 320. Now, again, 320 is perfectly fine size for an offensive tackle who's taller than him, let alone someone who's under 6'4". But it's more so, can he build his body differently if he wants to add anchoring strength. And I think he could. It's just whether the Steelers or him feel like that is the right idea, right? Like if he's going to be this uber athletic, pass protector, would they rather just have that and just say, okay, sometimes power rushers are going to get into him. That's okay. We can live with that. Or do they want to try to kind of change that aspect of his game? So we'll have to see what they want to do there.
Yeah, and that might just be the case. He might struggle throughout his career in that department, but if he's elite in pass protection, it's not really going to matter.
Yeah, we can live with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about his projected role for the Steelers here, Shayne. Obviously, that Pittsburgh has not come out and said exactly what they're going to do, and we talked about this last week. Yeah. They've legitimately drafted 2 left tackle types in back-to-back years, and so somebody has to play right tackle. You can't both be over on the left side, and so what do you think is going to happen ultimately, and what would you do?
It's tough. I think because Broderick performed well at right tackle last year as a rookie, and I think he got most of his time there already at the NFL level, it makes more sense for me to leave him there and let him keep developing there because he showed proficiency in being able to do that, right? If he had struggled mightily as a rookie to the point where like he looked lost out there and the footwork wasn't good and like he just didn't seem like he could do it, then I'd be very hard pressed to leave him there this year. I think you definitely want to keep him over at left and ask Troy to do that because I think Troy is good of an athlete as Broderick is. I think Troy's even more like natural as a mover and could probably do the footwork easier, all that stuff. But considering how important, I know the left tackle, right tackle thing is less of a thing now because guys will line up everywhere and you have to pass protect no matter where you're at. But I still like if I'm gonna pick between my tackles, whatever one I think is the most like natural pass protector, that's probably who I want defending the blind side of my quarterback. Like that's just kind of still my thought. Might be a little bit outdated at this point. I get that. But Fautanu still, even though Broderick is just as talented as him, if not more talented, depending on how we're looking at it, Fautanu is a better pass protector right now, I would say, than him. And we'll have to see. Obviously, that translates to the NFL, but his tools as a pass protector, I think, are just as good, if not better. So I'd rather him be at left. I do think, though, personally, the Steelers are going to do the opposite of that because that's what I want them to do. So, but I would do that.
Hey, this team started Dan Moore for 3 years, so yeah. We get it. But I agree with you. I agree with your assessment completely. I think that the upside for Fautanu to be an elite pass protector is all right there. Yes. He's played almost 2,000 snaps over the past 2 seasons at left tackle, and Broderick played 2023 mostly at right tackle, and so it kind of makes sense to just leave them where they are right now. Now, ironically, Fautanu was actually not the blindside protector, even though he was left tackle, because Michael Penix was left-handed, and so that actually went to Roger Rosengarten. But I think just having the muscle memory of playing those sides and doing so recently, I think that I would leave them. But I agree with you. I think that the Steelers' choice is going to be to switch them. I'm interested to see because I don't think that I think that Fautanu is pretty significantly better as a pass protector than he is as a run blocker. And so that would be my concern with flipping them around. A couple stats here, even that I have to throw out. Fautanu had 15 starts at left tackle, 984 snaps at left tackle last year. I mean, you won't see many more snaps in a single college season than that right there. No. 2 sacks allowed on 623 pass block reps, which is a ton, again, for a single season. And then an 88.2 pass block grade from Pro Football Focus last year, among the best in college football. And so you can see why he's got all that ability. It lines up with exactly what you see on film. And I think he can improve as a run blocker, but I think that his pass protection is always going to be his niche in the NFL. So that's what I would do with him as well. But I do think because the Steelers, Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan have expressed so much throughout the pre-draft process that they would like to move Broderick back over, I think that probably ultimately does get done. And we'll see how both make those adjustments. All right, Shayne, let's give our NFL player comparisons for Troy Fautanu. Who do you think he's going to be in the NFL? If you don't have one, Shayne, I have done this, and I've got an article coming out, so you guys will get the sneak peek here. I every year, and I've been doing this, I can't remember how many years now, I give a high-end comparison. Like if everything goes well, this is who you could be in the NFL if you reach your peak. I've got a low-end comparison, like, all right, you didn't really progress much since being drafted, and what are you most likely to be in the NFL? And so I'm going to give those. Do you have any player comps for Fautanu?
There's one that I want to throw out there that this is who I hope he becomes in terms of his upside. And this might be who your high end comp is. I don't know. We'll see. We haven't talked about it, so I might surprise you. Maybe I won't. Rashawn Slater of the Los Angeles Chargers is who you hope he becomes as a shorter tackle with, not overwhelming size or power or anything or length, but is just so good as a pass protector. So fluid. Slater himself has not been the best run blocker so far in his career, but I think he's going to continue to get better at that because of the size profile with him. It is a little bit difficult, but I think as pass protectors, like both these guys are so just now he's more definitely when it comes to Slater, he was more technically sound coming out of Northwestern. That was his big thing. But in terms of just the ability in pass protection and the athleticism in pass protection, those two are similar in that way. And I think that's who you hope he becomes. Past that, there's some other shorter tackles that unfortunately aren't quite as proficient in certain things that you can end up seeing him look like. But overall, that's like who I would be hoping he becomes and who I think he can become ultimately.
Yeah, Shayne, I'm going first next time because you stole it right.
I was worried about that.
So that is my high-end comp for Troy Fautanu. I think there's
Makes
a lot
sense.
of parallels to Rashawn Slater coming out of Northwestern. Slater, I think, pretty much instantly was one of the best pass protectors in the NFL. He's proven that when he's healthy. He's a significantly better pass protector than a run blocker, much like Fautanu was in college. And so in Rashawn Slater came in just a tick over 6'4" and only like 303 pounds with 33 inch arms. And so Fautanu has him in the weight department and the length department. So it's just a little bit shorter. So not quite the same exact build, but very similar in how they play. Slater had he's a 97.2 percentile athlete according to his relative athletic score. Fautanu 96.2 percentile athlete. So they're both elite when it comes to foot quickness and mobility at that position. They win in a very, very similar way. And so I think that is reasonable to have as the high end comp. And my goodness, if the Steelers are getting Rashawn Slater, like sign me up for that. Like that's a guy you trade up for in the draft. And so I think when Slater is healthy, he's one of the best that there is in the business in pass protection. So I'd love that. My low end comp for Troy Fautanu, I'm going to give you a Steelers one for this one because I know that it's easy to relate to. Kelvin Beachum. All right. This is not a knock. I know that Beachum was a 7th round compensatory pick. I think he was back in 2012. Beachum was small. He was 6'2", 300 pounds with 33.25 inch arms. And so just tiny in every way for a tackle. But my goodness, this guy has had a great NFL career. It's come on 4 different teams, but he started a ton of games in this league at left tackle, only moved to right tackle once he got into his 30s. And so just a really, really long, productive NFL career. And I do think that is the floor for Fautanu. That's a high floor, but I said all along, I think this is one of the highest floor prospects in this draft. And so I think it's very reasonable. Now, he might not have that longevity. There's certainly a chance if there is issues with his knee. It is. It's hard to know how long he's going to last in the league. I think if the knee checks out and he doesn't have arthritis or anything crazy going on there, he could last just as long as what Beachum did. But I think at his peak, I can see him absolutely being Beachum at his floor, where you are still a quality left tackle in the NFL because of your pass protection. You're not going to be the most well-rounded because you are undersized. You do have some limitations that way. So I'm going to call that Fautanu's floor. And obviously we've seen a lot of Beachum over the years, and Beachum came right before Alejandro Villanueva, who Villanueva ended up being a Pro Bowler. Beachum never earned a Pro Bowl in his long NFL career, but was still a quality stopgap starter for the Steelers. I think that's the floor for Fautanu. My most likely player comp, and I'm going to age myself a little bit here. And if you have something else, I'd love you to be able to throw it in the chat. My most likely comp, I went with Chester Pitts, former high 2nd round pick from the Houston Texans all the way back in 2002. I know that we're kind of digging back for this player comp, but the reason why I did so is because Pitts came in at 6'3.5", 320 pounds. And he's just a very, very similar frame. It's hard to find guys that have that type of frame.
It is.
And so I wanted to get someone who fits that mix. I didn't want to go with a completely different body type here because I want someone that looks the part. And so Chester Pitts was a good athlete coming out as well. I think he tested as an 86th percentile athlete. So not quite as dominant of athlete as Fautanu, still good, and they didn't do as much training back then. We're talking over 20 years ago now. Pitts is a guy who had a really good NFL career. He's first 7 seasons in the league, never missed a game, started every single game for the Texans. His first 4 years, the majority of his first 4 years, he played left tackle in Houston. And then he was moved for the second half of his NFL career. He was moved to left guard. And so again, even the career path, I can see a similar route where Fautanu, it's like, all right, maybe you're doing a good job at tackle, but something else has fallen into our lap here. We got an opportunity to draft another guy, whatever it may be. And you kick him into guard, and he ends up being a really good guard. And that's what Pitts ended up doing for the Texans. And so I think that is a reasonable comp there. Now, Pitts' career was cut short. His last 2 seasons, he had season-ending injuries, only played 9 games over his last 2 years. So his career was cut a little bit short, but was a guy that just never missed a snap, played really hard. It's hard to dig up a lot of Chester Pitts tape, but I feel like in terms of like a body type athlete comparison and a similar career route going from left tackle to left guard, I can see something totally similar happening with Fautanu for the Steelers and him being a guy that follows along that career path. If you're looking for a more recent NFL comparison for like a most likely comp, I think like a Zach Tom of the Green Bay Packers would be a good one as well. Kind of an undersized tackle, short arms, but an elite athlete who makes it work and is a quality football player because of that. So we still have to obviously see how the rest of his career unfolds, but those are my player comps. If you guys have any other player comps that you've noticed that stuck out to you when you were watching Troy Fautanu tape, please drop them down in the chat here on YouTube. We would love to hear what you'd have to say.
Yeah, I agree with the floor Beachum, and I take Beach any day over Moore. Yeah, unfortunately,
for sure.
Unfortunately, Dan Moore continues to be just pummeled by the show. But I agree, Beachum would definitely be an upgrade. And I'm glad you brought him up because what a career that guy's had. Like I know we talked about him as the floor. I wouldn't necessarily be like satisfied with the 20th overall pick, but like.
Agreed.
Beachum was really good for us. He was definitely not the problem at any point while he was the starter. So I would take it. So.
Yep, definitely not. All right. If you're a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Still Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Still Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. All right, Shayne, with that, let's get to our way too early 53-man roster predictions. I know a lot of people hate this stuff. A lot of people like this stuff. Regardless, we're going to do it. We're going to run through the players that are currently on the roster. We're going to give our predictions for who's going to make the squad here. And obviously, we know that a few other things are going to unfold. I think the Steelers still have a few more signings they have to make to get to that 90-man summer roster. It could be a few big moves even in place here. We'll see what they do with that extra cap space now that you've restructured Alex Highsmith and you haven't done anything with that money. So I'm interested to see what you have. We'll just kind of go back and forth here. Shayne, you have a prediction handy here?
Yeah, I am pulling up mine right now, actually. So, but
okay. So we'll run through it just like you would on Madden or whatever. We'll start with the quarterback position, run through all the offensive players, and we'll go right down the list. So let's start with quarterback here. I can start, Shayne, and I'll kick it over to you as you're getting that ready. So I've got 3 quarterbacks making the roster. I'm not breaking trend here, even though Omar Khan has broken a lot of draft trends. I think Mike Tomlin's still in charge of this, and the Steelers are going to keep 3 quarterbacks. For right now, at least, I have Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, and Kyle Allen as the emergency 3rd quarterback for the Steelers. John Rice Plumlee is also in the building. We'll see how they use him. I think he might be, honestly, destined to be maybe a practice squad receiver or something. I don't know if he's going to stick at quarterback or not.
Me either, actually.
But due to lack of options at the position, I'm going with Kyle Allen as the 3rd quarterback right now.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that he has obviously the inside track to be the 3rd quarterback, and I think he'll be obviously the inactive on game days but technically available thing that they have now. Yeah, like that is likely what's going to happen unless for some reason they bring in another quarterback to compete for that role, but they usually stick with 4 guys in camp, and unless Plumlee is going to immediately be moved to receiver like from the get-go, they shouldn't need to bring anyone else in for camp at least. So we'll see if that happens, but I agree totally. Those are going to be the 3 quarterbacks, barring some other signing at quarterback, I would imagine.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be shocked to see them do something else just to bring in one more body for competition here this summer. But if we don't know any better, we're going with what we know. So it's going to be Kyle Allen right now at the quarterback position as number 3. Moving on to running backs. I've got just 3 true running backs making the team. That's Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren, and Cordarrelle Patterson.
Yep.
It's worth noting, and I've said this before in the podcast, last year, only 2 running backs touched the ball from the backfield all season long for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. They could probably get by with 2, honestly, for how heavily they use those 2 guys. Yeah. Patterson's making the team, though. He's going to make it as a kick returner and a reserve running back if somebody ends up getting injured here.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think those are the 3 actual running backs that make the roster. And I know Patterson is kind of this hybrid player, but he's been a running back for a while, and that's been his best spot in terms of offensive play. He'll be more of that return guy. Maybe he'll get more touches than the 3rd running back got last year, or I guess he would have to get more because, again, no one else touched it but those 2. But I think he would be more likely to get worked in than any of the guys we had last year, especially with Arthur Smith coming in. I think he wants to kind of use all the guys he has. So.
And Shayne, we haven't talked about the Najee 5th-year option situation yet. I want to talk about that real quick while we're talking about our running back predictions here. I know that you're a fan of Najee, and Najee, I think, is coming off of his best season as a professional football player. I understand why the Steelers did what they did. I actually wrote an article on why Steelers fans should applaud Omar Khan because of this business decision. I know that you and I might disagree on this, so I want to get your thoughts real quick on this, and then I'll share mine.
My thing ultimately is I think he has played well enough to justify the price of the 5th-year option. But I also understand that you're moving into a new offense. You don't know what this offense is going to look like with him running the ball in it. It is going to be a system where theoretically Warren is a better fit, just in terms of like the skill sets and what you're going to be asking these guys to do. I think it does make some sense to say, listen, Najee, we're not saying we're not going to bring you around, or like we're not going to keep you around past this next year or so. We're not saying any of that. However, we want to see what this offense looks like with you running in a more of a wide zone type system, right? And if he performs really well, then maybe he ends up getting a better contract for him anyway. Maybe the team's like, well, you did what we wanted you to do. Here's a nice 2 or 3 year deal worth more than what you're going to get in the 5th-year option, right? But it also is very easily possible that he's not a great fit for the new system, right? Maybe he just isn't performing as well as he did last year. Maybe Warren is outpacing him. Not only from a yards per carry standpoint, but just again from a total like offensive value standpoint. And he just kind of gets not lost in the shuffle per se, but maybe gets supplanted by him fully this year. And I think, if you said that going into this year and we hired a different offensive coordinator that wasn't more of a wide zone thing, I'd be more surprised if that happened. With what we're going to be looking at, it's more likely than it's ever been that he could end up getting supplanted. Not necessarily because he's not still a good player. It just might not be the best scheme fit for him. So if this offense ends up looking really good this year and they want to keep doing it, if he's not a great fit for it, it would make sense not to have him as a 5th-year option player.
Yeah, and I understand fans that have made arguments on both sides of the fence here. I can see it both ways. Truly, I wouldn't have been upset if the Steelers gave Najee the 5th-year option because, like you said, the price is right. Like it's $6.8 million. It's not going to break the bank to keep a guy who's never missed an NFL game. I mean, that's the insurance that you could have had. Now, my reasoning, Shayne, is it has less to do with the money and more to do about the outlook. Because again, we're looking 2 years from now. Really, he's got a whole nother season to play. He will be 27 and a half years old by the time the 2025 season starts. That's not old for an NFL player, but it is kind of old for running back just in terms of we can see the curve. Like we can see the bell curve of these guys. It's like 24 to 26 years old. That's when you're at your peak. When you go beyond that, most running backs really tailor off after that. But in his case, he's had a ton of tread already off the tires. Like I think don't quote me now, but I believe I'm just spitballing these numbers from the article that I wrote. It was something to the tune of 1,496 carries that Najee's had since his Alabama days. For Jaylen Warren from college to now is at 683 carries. I mean, you're talking about more than double the workload that Najee already has on that body that again is older than Warren as well. And then you add the scheme fit thing on top of that. Like for a wide zone running back to work effectively, you need to move really fast laterally and then cut upfield in a hurry.
Yeah, one cut runner type.
I just don't think that that's Najee's game. You got to remember this guy didn't even test coming into the NFL, and there were suspicions that he could have been a 4.6-ish running back. I don't think he's probably gotten faster after the wear and tear. And so I do think that he would be much better suited for a true gap team, kind of like the Steelers have been in the past. And that's why, to me, like, I know they were just rumors. They were completely shot down quickly by Jane Slater, but it does make a little bit of sense if the Dallas Cowboys did have some interest in this guy, because Cowboys are running a true gap scheme. They're just going to power and bully the guy in front of you. And I think Najee would be a good fit there. I don't know how he's going to look yet on the Steelers. I can't be confident enough to say that he's going to have a better season this year than he did last year, especially when you look at the running back curve and know that running backs typically their production and efficiency starts to go down after age 26, and Najee is 26 right now. So I get the proactive approach from Omar Khan here. Maybe the plan is to kind of roll with Jaylen Warren. They probably love what they've seen from Warren these last 2 years. Maybe he's that guy that they're already planning is going to get the second contract. And I think that makes sense for the reasons we just talked about: less wear and tear, more speed and explosiveness, better receiving ability, and a better fit in Arthur Smith's scheme, ideally. And then maybe they'll add a mid-roundish draft pick to that group, or sign somebody in free agency who fits that bill. So I can see both ways there.
That's the main thing. And just looking at it again, like, it's not so much about whether Najee deserves it. It's more so, is this the right offense for him to maintain his production, right? Because, yeah, he's the only running back in the last 3 years to have 1,000 yards all 3 years. Like, the only guy in the NFL to do that. Now, a lot of that is because he plays. Let's just be honest about it. But at the same time, he's also been very productive, especially the back half of the years when defenses start to slow down, when guys don't want to tackle quite as much, right? Like, that's kind of the thing with Najee, is once guys don't want to tackle him that much, he takes advantage of that by putting you in the ground and running around the edge and getting yards that way. So if he doesn't do well in this scheme, it's probably for the best that he moves on, right? It's not really necessarily a problem of, like, would the Steelers would love to have him for a long time. Sure, he's a great leader. People love him in the locker room. We know that. We know how much of a personality he is at times. Like, that's all great. But you don't want a guy to play for you who isn't getting the most out of his skill set by playing for you, right? You don't want to force a square peg into a round hole. And that might be what happens here. Now, Smith might surprise us and throw in some more gap stuff, maybe some more power stuff. And maybe that's where Najee shines, right? Like, maybe he plays more of, like, not like a part-time role, but it's just a different type of role than he's played for us in the past. But it's worth, I think, for them to say, like, listen, as much as we'd love to keep you on the fifth-year option, let's see how this year goes, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of value in having a guy that doesn't miss playing time.
Yes.
And so I could have got behind either decision, but I understand completely that this is, I mean, Omar Khan means business. I think that he's shown that with all the moves he's making. He took Mason McCormick in the 4th round when you could have taken a slot corner. You could have taken other things. He has a proactive approach that I love, quite frankly. I love that he's looking ahead and not just viewing things as taking a year by year approach, kind of. And that's really what it felt like Kevin Colbert was doing his last 5 seasons. Like, we got a hole, we need to fill it right now. I'm not concerned about anything else. Khan's kind of the opposite, where it's like the Mason McCormick pick, you are looking ahead and saying, yeah, this guy might not see the field right now, but maybe he could be a starting guard for us down the line. And so I think the approach was kind of the same with Najee, just looking ahead to the future, say, how many carries are you going to have under your belt by age 27 and a half and going into the 2025 season? Are you a good fit? And so just examining these things and electing not to do that, I thought was an interesting decision and one that I can get on board with. And I know that a lot of fans will disagree with that.
I get it, though. I do. Yeah.
Shayne, do you have any true fullbacks making the team this year?
If Hayward's not a true fullback, then probably not. I think it's gonna be the tight ends being kind of pigeonholed in that role at times, and Hayward specifically. At least I hope so. I think Connor's done enough in his career to justify that. So not true fullbacks unless we're considering Connor.
Yep, agreed. Same with me here. I've got 4 tight ends making the team: Pat Freiermuth, Darnell Washington, Connor Hayward, and Michael Pruitt. I think they keep that 4th there because Pruitt and Hayward both can do a little bit of that fullback role,
that H-back, stuff like that.
The collection of them, it's essentially like having 3 tight ends in the fullback. So 4 tight ends for me.
Same as well. Yeah, we're good there.
Okay. Offensive line, I've got the Steelers keeping 9 as they typically do. And the 9 that I chose is interesting because it does leave somebody off that made the 53-man roster last year. I have Broderick Jones, Troy Fautanu, Isaac Siamalu, Zach Frazier, James Daniels, Nate Herbig, Mason McCormick, And my final 2 spots go to Dan Moore Jr. and Dylan Cook. And so I've got 4 tackles making the team. The person who doesn't make my roster this year is Spencer Anderson. And just talk about drawing the short straw with Steelers, not only drafting 3 offensive linemen, but 2 of those guys were interior guys doing the job that you were meant to do. And so Spencer Anderson does not make the team this time around.
Full agreement there. No differences so far really at all. We'll see if there are any differences. But no, I think unfortunately Anderson is just, again, he's the lowest value player so far of these guys, a 7th round pick. Didn't really get to do anything as a rookie, obviously, for, you don't want a guy like that to have to play, but he didn't. So he didn't get to show a ton outside of what he showed in camp and practice. So he does kind of draw the short end. I'm assuming he ends up on the practice squad. Maybe a team wants to grab him if they think he's a good enough player to add to their 53, but probably ends up as a practice squad player. We'll see if he sticks around. But drafting 3 offensive linemen and, like you said, 2 of them being interior guys, I just think it's too much for him to overcome. I think Herbig is still going to make the roster, obviously. And so that's kind of the only guy that he has to compete with is that probably.
Yeah, such an uphill battle for him. And maybe he makes enough strides where somebody poaches him and he ends up on somebody else's roster. But I think he's pretty destined to be on the practice squad at this point in time. All right, let's move to the defensive side of the ball here, Shayne. Let's start with our interior defensive line. I've got Cameron Hayward, Keanu Benton, 6 total, by the way. Cameron Hayward, Keanu Benton, Larry Ogunjobi, Dean Lowry, Logan Lee, and Montrevious Adams. And so for mine, Shayne, I actually cut out Leal and Loudermilk off my roster this year.
I mean, it's hard for me to really argue that. I do think there's a chance, and this is mostly just because now granted, Leal couldn't get on the field. So like that's the biggest problem.
Yeah.
But I just don't care for Adams. I really don't. And I know
I don't either.
I know he doesn't fill the same role that Leal would fill. Like, so I understand it's different there too. And like, you want to see Logan Lee make the roster. I think that he is the best of that type that they've been looking at. We talked about that, especially compared to Loudermilk. But I think it kind of like, I think him and Leal are the 2 that are fighting for that like undersized, like kind of hybrid-y interior player. And maybe you do just give the nod to the more recent guy. And even though Leal was drafted higher, but he just hasn't seen the field, like something would have to change with how they view him and how he's played for him to be safe, I think. And so I mean, unless Dean Lowry is just not good enough as a veteran and just gets cut, right? Like, which is possible. I mean, it's not like he's, this player that is guaranteed a roster spot at this point in his career, but I think you're probably right. Like, I would kind of flip-flop between Leal and Lowry/Lee making it. But I do think the Loudermilk thing can be done with. I think we're kind of past that. Adams, unfortunately, just kind of fills a role that the other guys don't, so he's probably making the team. But yeah, I have 6-2, and I would kept flip-flopping between kind of the last spot there. But
yeah, I mean, I understand that completely. And I feel like between Logan Lee, DeMarvin Leal, and Isaiah Loudermilk, that might be a 3 dogs and 2 bone situation, or maybe a 3 dogs and 1 bone situation. You might only get one out of those 3 to work. And I know that they all have a slightly different roles. And look, I missed on DeMarvin Leal. I did like him coming out of college. I'll own up to it because I feel like I don't miss very often. And so when it happens, I'll let you know. I don't think the Steelers did him any favors. And the fit from the very beginning was just so questionable. I mean, you get a guy that's a little under 6'4", 283 pounds at the NFL Combine, and just he was stuck in between a base defensive end and a interior defender in a bad way, and he just couldn't make it work. And I think it's a really bad sign for him to be a healthy scratch in the second half of the season last year. Like that's not the progress you want to see. You went backwards the other way, and he landed on IR as a rookie too. So he's definitely behind the bell curve here, and so I do have him unfortunately not making the roster this year. We'll see what happens. It is there's always a bunch of guys in this group, and I think that interior defensive line is always one of the hardest groups to predict. I mean, you got Braden Fajoko there who didn't make the roster last year, and just a bunch of guys that are all kind of in that same cluster there. So it just depends on who can kind of edge the other person out. I do have Logan Lee, though, because I think the Steelers are going to preference their 6th-round rookie over maybe the guys that have been there for a few years that haven't worked out yet.
Yeah, and we had a chat about with Leal could play outside linebacker, backup for Alex.
Yeah, I mean, at base,
they tried to do that. They tried that.
He's just not fast enough, though.
Yeah, he's just not he just doesn't have enough athleticism at his bigger size to make that work. And yeah, like
and that's the thing with it, you got to remember, like when you move a player like Leal inside, it compared to interior defenders, Leal's a good athlete. I mean, this guy can move. He's fast, he's bendy. But when you compare him to edge rushers, all of a sudden he's not a very good athlete anymore. He looks more like Taco Charlton out there.
It's much
because
different.
when you run a 5-second 40 as an edge guy, you are not fast in respect to that position. So the positions are very different. Yes, I do think he can play some in base and in obvious running downs and goal line, that type of stuff. But he's not a guy that you can stick out there as a true edge defender and feel comfortable about that role. I truly think he went to the wrong type of team. He really needed to go to a team that was going to use him as kind of just like a penetrating situational pass rusher type. And the Steelers really haven't got a lot of use out of him in that regard. All right, Shayne, edge defenders, I have 4. The Steelers only ever keep 4. They probably will only keep 4 as long as Mike Tomlin and Tara Lawson are there. Those are TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Nick Herbig, and Jeremiah Moon for my 4th spot. The 4th spot, I feel like, can go a number of directions here. Honestly, it could be a guy that's not on the team yet, even. And so I wouldn't be shocked if that's the case. That 4th guy, they're typically, he's not going to see the field a lot. I know they did last year with Marcus Golden there. They kind of had 2 guys come off the bench. Typically, they only have 1 guy come off the bench, and that 4th guy is primarily a core special teams player. I think that'll be the case. And so I'm slotting Jeremiah Moon for that last spot.
So I have the same top 3, of course. In my 4th spot, I essentially just said dealer's choice. It could be any of the guys on the roster. It could be someone off the roster. I hope it's someone off the roster personally. I want to have a 4th edge who actually has like played in the NFL to some degree. That's my hope. Now, I don't know if they're going to do that again like they did last year, but I really want them to, because as much as, throwing Herbig out there to spell TJ makes a ton of sense, I want someone to be able to help spell Highsmith as well without it just being Herbig. I want them both to be able to sit for a little bit if they have to. Like if we have a big defensive drive coming up where we have to really get a stop, I want them to be able to get some rest in between snaps. And I think just Herbig by himself, as much as I'd love to see him play a lot, it's probably asking a lot to play 300-400 snaps as the backup to both of them. So in general, if they can find someone to be the 4th edge, I think Golden's still out there. I think we talked about, I think he's still a free agent possibly right now. I'd be fine with him coming back. If it's another edge rusher that's out there in the market, just somebody who can come in, and honestly, especially someone who could be like a true edge setter, it would be nice as well, because I think that really only the 2 starters can do that right now. Like Herbig is really explosive, but he's not an edge setter necessarily. So yeah, that's definitely what I hope is the case. So
yeah, 100%. Agree with that assessment, 100%. And I'm going to be real blunt here. I think this Steelers keeping 4 edge rushers, that is a trend. That trend needs to die. Like right
I really
now.
hope. I wish. Yeah,
you could argue that it's the 2nd most important position on your team next to quarterback. And when everything you do revolves around the health of TJ Watt. Like if this guy goes down, your team is not the same. And so to only have 1 legitimate backup plan, which is Nick Herbig, who still has a lot to prove. And like you said, he's not a true edge setting guy, like that's going to just take on the meat and grind of things right in the mix.
Yes.
He's more of your finesse, quickness pass rusher.
Yes.
They need to start keeping 5 guys here. They need to kind of get with the times here. It's such an important position. Not only that, but keep your guys fresh. Like there's no sense of playing Watt and Highsmith 85-90% of the snaps during the season, only to have them completely gassed by the end of the year. Like I do think that they do have a little bit of catching up with the times to do at this position, particularly. I wish they would keep 5. I'm not predicting that because we just haven't seen it yet. And so I'm saying they keep 4, and we don't even know who that 4th guy is going to be at this point in time. All right. Off-ball linebackers here, Shayne. I've got the Steelers keeping 5, and they are Patrick Queen, Peyton Wilson, and Landon Roberts, Cole Holcomb, and Mark Robinson. I know there's a lot of questions around Holcomb's health right now. That could change. Like I would not be shocked, Shayne, if Holcomb is the guy that they cut. And that would make me sad because I think that he played pretty well when he was healthy. But if the guy has nerve damage, if he doesn't look the same, if he's not on track with his recovery, the Steelers could save $6 million by making him a post June 1st cut, or if he's cut sometime after June 1st, they could use that money to get it maybe a different linebacker. I want this group to make the team. I want Holcomb to return healthy because I think that, I mean, my goodness, when's the last time the Steelers have had 4 linebackers that deep with that much upside there in that group? I think that if Holcomb can do that, you are sitting real pretty at that position. I have Mark Robinson making the team as the 5th and kind of taking on that old role that who was it? Who was it that used to have that role? The name is escaping me right now. He shared a name with Marcus Allen.
Oh, Marcus Allen.
He shared a name with an NFL star.
Gotcha.
Marcus Allen. It's sometimes that happens to me. I need a new processor. So I have him taking the 5th linebacker role as the guy that's just going to be the core special teamer, just load up on your defensive special team snaps here. But I think that those are the 5 that make it this year.
Yeah, I agree. I think, unfortunately, Holcomb is the guy that we have to kind of wonder about a little bit, is just like, what is his role going to be? Because we just don't know with the injury, right? If he's healthy enough to be in camp and to do stuff, then great. I mean, it's probably going to be him and Queen manning the middle for most of the time, right? And that's fine. Yeah. Like, I think that's great if that happens. If not, you start to wonder, okay, like, who's going to be in this linebacker room outside of just Queen? Like, Wilson, obviously, you hope is ready to go right away. He'd be the guy that I'd want to play a lot of. Landon Roberts is going to be the run defender guy, of course, for them. Like, he's going to play a lot of snaps regardless of the situation. And then, Robinson, he's a special teamer, like you said. I think, unfortunately, it's just kind of what he is. I don't know if he's ever going to be more than that. And that's fine for being your 5th guy, obviously. But the 5th guy might have to be someone else if they want to keep 5, if Holcomb obviously isn't ready to go, or maybe is cut, like you said, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think that like the PUP list is an option, obviously, for him.
For sure.
It's ready to go.
I imagine he starts on that, and they kind of
they'll probably take that route, and so that would obviously they'd have a body in his place for the time being, and they'll see how he progresses. Let's move over to cornerbacks. I've got 5 cornerbacks making the team right now, and this is a position I think the Steelers very well could add to before training camp, and I think they will. So, but for now, I've got Joey Porter Jr., Dante Jackson, Corey Trice Jr., Darius Rush, and Ryan Watts, the rookie. And so a bunch of your long avatar type cornerbacks with 1 small guy and 0 slot corners in here.
Yeah, unfortunately, I kind of agree. I will say hope, and granted, maybe this is me being wishful thinking. Again, every undrafted free agents come out of nowhere all the time. I kind of hope Beanie Bishop makes the team in his can play slot.
Yeah, okay.
Like, that's, if I had to pick something to happen, that's kind of my hope, because who's going to play nickel right now?
Somebody has to.
Yeah, somebody has to do it. If he plays well enough in camp and they don't add to the position, like, they almost have to hope he can do it. Like, that is kind of the problem, is you're kind of banking right now, like, of the guys on this roster that I could see playing the slot, probably Profile's the best of them. And that's a problem. It just is. Like, the fact that we don't have an actual slot corner on the roster that has any sort of NFL experience is kind of insane to me. Like, it really, because you have to understand too, from my perspective, I love like the direction of defenses that have these awesome slot players that impact the game in multiple ways. Like, I love defenses that do that. And the best defenses in the league have those guys. And we just, it's like we don't think that the position exists. It's like, guys, what are we doing? Like, this is an important position. You live in nickel defenses now. You cannot play base defense that much. Nickels are going to be out there. Why not have them be good, or at least have the potential to be good? Steelers just don't seem to care. Bothers me.
No,
that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, 100%. I think a slot corner is essentially a starting player in today's NFL. Remember back in 2020, it was Antoine Brooks, who is that was going to be like the plan. Like, the Steelers didn't have any other plan, and he ended up not doing it, got injured and didn't do anything for them. And so it kind of feels like that again, where it's maybe you'll put a safety in that role. I don't know. Like, I don't know what you're going to do.
Talking about
they don't have a slot.
Minka, like, here's the problem. Minka can play the slot, but why would we ask him? Like, his value is
you're taking away what he does best.
Yeah, like, I get it. Like, technically, if we're being like just objective about it, he's the best slot corner on the roster because he can do that.
Yeah.
but he's the free safety. Like, we want him to be the free safety. It's the whole idea of him, right? Like, that's where his value comes from. Is like, I'm just going to take everything off, like, over the top of the defense, and you can't throw there. Like, that's ideally how he's used. Now, he hasn't been able to do that as much as we want him to for a myriad of reasons, but that's still what we want him to do. So it's, again, like, nickel, just, they need to do something. I don't know if it's going to come in the form of a signing or a trade or whatever it is, but I hope that we're wrong about the corner room simply because someone else is added. So
your prediction is probably wiser than mine, Shayne, because I didn't include one on here because I just have no idea who it's going to be. Maybe it's
I don't know either.
Yeah. Maybe they do try to move Dante Jackson inside. Like, I can't rule that out either, because you've got a bunch of, like, it absolutely looks like at the cornerback position, they want to get long and physical in this press defense. They have a bunch of guys that fit that bill. Dante Jackson's not one of them. Now, maybe I know he really hasn't done it, but maybe they would be willing to try to experiment with him inside, kind of like they did with Patrick Peterson last year. So later in his career, we'll see. I have a feeling that there's going to be a guy at this position that you and I did not mention yet that's going to be on this roster.
I hope so. Yeah.
All right, Shayne, safeties. I've got 5 as well. I've got Minkah Fitzpatrick, Deshaun Elliott, DeMonte Casey, Miles Killebrew, the all-pro special teamer, and then Trenton Thompson making the team again this year.
Totally agree there. I think that's who should be the safety group, and I think it will be that way. And I think at the end of the day, I think that's totally fine. I think now that they've brought in Elliott, I think he can be a true strong safety, allow Minkah to kind of do his thing, and the other guys can fill in where necessary. Killebrew, obviously, the all-pro special teamer. You love to have him back. I was glad that they did that, especially because they didn't bring back Boykin. But ultimately, I think that's the best safety group that they could go with, and I don't think they're going to try to add to that at all. I think that's where they're at with it.
Yep, I agreed. I can see. I mean, if they don't keep Trenton Thompson, they keep 4 safeties or they keep a different fifth. That's fine. Yeah, I'm not going to cry over that, but I do think he played well enough last year to maybe earn another look again this season in that role. And the other thing I got to consider here too, Shayne, is maybe they view Darius Rush as a safety. Maybe they do. Maybe he's a safety, and then you're looking at another corner or 2 that you need in the cornerback room. And so it all depends on how they view these guys here. I know that Rush played safety for him last year, but I think that those are the 5 that I'm sticking with for now, for the time being. And that leaves us with 3 players left, our 3 specialists here. These ones are always easy to predict, and that's Chris Boswell, the kicker, Cameron Johnston, the new punter here, and then Christian Kuntz, the long snapper.
Yeah, very unlikely that changes, barring injury. I think Johnston being brought in at least settles the punting room, as weird as that is to say. Settles that position. I think it was time to do so, unfortunately. But you bring him in on a decent contract, honestly. But you paid him to come in and settle that. They shouldn't have to worry too much about anymore. He's a good punter, not anything spectacular or anything, but you didn't have to draft with somebody or do anything like that again. I'm fine with it.
Yeah. Not wasting a draft pick at the position is always a plus. Yes. There's no doubt in my mind he's going to be an improvement over Presley Harvin. Just didn't work out with him. Way too inconsistent. He would have some nice punts, far too many bad punts mixed in between. And look, the Steelers, they signed Cameron Johnston when they could have signed Tommy Townsend for a very similar price. They
that's one thing.
Yeah. So I do think that Johnston is a solid punter. Like, I don't think you're gonna have to worry about the positioning again for a few years at least.
Hopefully not. Yeah.
They've got that taken care of. Those are our roster predictions. If you guys have any disagreements or thoughts about the list that Shayne and I just shared, please drop it down in the chat below. Next week, we're going to get to our scouting breakdown on center Zach Frazier.
Yes.
And we'll see what else comes up between now and then. We go live on the show every single Wednesday at 1:30. So if you like it, please keep coming back. Tell your friends about it. We love doing this. Thank you all for joining us on the show today. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Still Curtain podcast. And thanks again for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.